likes to fish. Do a little chartering on Lake George. I'm the kind of guy, I like to do a lot of things, and I'm the master at none of them. So.
Joe, the mic's right there.
Oh, thanks. I don't think I ever used that.
Oh, it said the mic's
Oh,
right
it's
there.
Gotcha. Pretty funny looking mic. So yeah, today, like I said, I'm the kind of person, I'm always out doing something. All summer I'm obviously on the water a lot, 3 to 4 days a week. Wintertime, not so much. I work 2 jobs. I work at Skidmore College in the kitchen, so, you know, I'm a busy guy all year. Summertime, I'm working 2 jobs. I'm fishing a lot, 3 to 4 times a week. If I don't have customers on the boat, I'm out playing and learning, and, you know, that's what I like to do. So today we're going to talk about jigging 2020. You know, in this day and age, there's just so much stuff out there. Seems like every time I come into Jeff's shop, there's more and more stuff every year. What do you get? You know, what are you fishing for? There's so many different electronics and fish finders, and, you know, it just blows your mind what we have available to us nowadays. I can remember growing up as a kid, going out with Dad. You go to the bait shop, you know, you guys can probably remember those days 20 and 30 years ago. You walk in, there's some minnows, some jig and rapalas. You know, you ask the guy what color Swedish pimple you should buy to go catch lake trout. And, you know, you really didn't know much unless you knew somebody that fished the lake. You have to go out to find a certain hump, or, you know, where the perch are. If you don't see the guys already out there, you got to line a flagpole up with, you know, the blue camp. And it was a lot harder back then. You know, you really had to be dialed in. Nowadays we have underwater cameras, we have sonar, we have flashers, we have, you know, all this different stuff that helps us. So we're going to just talk about some of the stuff I like to use for the techniques I like to use and the fish that I like to fish for. Like I said, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. I like to dabble in a lot of things, and I'm going to share to you what's worked with me, for me, with those certain species. And we'll go for there. Feel free to fire in at any point. I mean, I'm sure I could learn something from just about every single person in this room, so feel free to fire away. So, the golden ages of ice fishing, like I said before, I really believe we are. I mean, we can reap the benefits of all this stuff. There's so many different plastics. I just met Scott Ross, who makes his own stuff, and I'm sure his stuff is phenomenal. And, you know, you just got to try it all and see what works. Electronics, so important. Unfortunately, I've become so reliant on them that, you know, for certain things, I don't even know if I would be able to catch anything without them. And that's pretty sad, but it's just kind of how it is. Mapping, very, very important to me. I'll get into what I like to use as far as flashers and graphs and what they mean and, you know, what you want for different things. Rod and reels, I mean, wow. It just seems like with cell phones and everything else, just more and more stuff comes out every year, and it makes it that much more confusing. You know, it can be, or not necessarily, but it seems like if you don't have the latest and greatest thing, you're left behind. But not necessarily, and we'll talk about that. Rods have definitely become cheaper, lighter, more sensitive, with a lot bigger variety of different actions and things for an affordable price. You know, I remember in the old days, you'd go into the shop, they'd have the HT poles for $7.99, which I still use a lot. I think they're great. And then if you wanted something really nice, you had to spend $100 and get a St. Croix or, you know, one of those custom-made rods, and you just don't have to do that anymore. Jeff's got all the 13 fishing stuff up there. That stuff it's just phenomenal what you can get now for 30 to 40 bucks. You basically can get a custom rod with a variety of different actions, okay? And we'll talk about that. So yeah, let's talk about electronics. There's one of my fish finders. My personal favorite is a graph. For a couple reasons. I'm used to seeing them. I'm an open water fisherman. I'm always looking at a graph, and I for me, it's just a better depiction of the water. And I can read bait. I can oftentimes distinguish different kinds of bait versus a flasher, which is, just a lot of bright lines, basically. I think flashers have their place. If you're basically just an ice fisherman and you're used to that system, maybe you go to the same, you just like to catch panfish, you got a couple lakes you go to, and that's your deal. You go out there, you know where to go, and you're going to finesse the heck out of them all day. I think they're great for that. I'm a big fan of the graphs because you can get the split screen with the map on it. So now you got GPS, you can see where you are on the water, and you have the graph and sonar on the other side. I think it'd be really cool if the flasher companies, they got on board with something like that. Maybe they do. I don't even know yet, but that's just my personal favorite thing. We're going to talk about contour mapping and breaking down the water. Did anybody go to Richie's seminar earlier where he talked about that? That's kind of the meat and potatoes of fishing, in my opinion. I don't care what you got, or what you're using. If you're not where the fish are, obviously you're not going to catch them. It's just like hunting. If you're a good deer hunter, you're really good at picking that location that you need to be at to put yourself in give yourself the best chances at killing that deer. It's the same thing with fishing. And the way to do that is with contour maps. Look at them and kind of analyze the areas and eliminate large majorities of the area to help you be more successful. Aqua view, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about that right now. So this is something I really haven't used the underwater camera, even though they've been available for so long now. What really piqued my interest about the new models is the fin comes off of them. So I'll get this right out for you guys so you can see what I'm talking about. So the old Aqua Views, they had the fin on them that was attached like this, and you would have to just tinker with that thing to no end to get it to be, in front of your presentation. What you do now is it basically works just like a transducer, and I'm telling you right now, for stuff like perch on Lake George, where they're always on bottom, you put this thing down there and it's game over. You can just set the jig around the tip of their nose with these things, and I'll show you how that works. Not a very expensive unit here. This is, I think these start at $300. But what you do is you drop this down the hole, and you watch your jig go underneath it. You're jigging, a fish comes up to it, you can actually watch him bite your lure, set the hook. It's that simple. Anybody that's a big crappie bluegill fisherman, you know how they like to suck the jig and spit it right back out. A lot of times you'll see that mark approach your presentation, and it'll be right there. They might bite. You're not going to feel it or see it. They like to do that. They like to come up and just slurp things in without, you're really seeing it on your strike indicator. So this is one thing it's just so much fun. You can really see what's going on down there as far as weeds, and what kind of cover and structure you have. And the knock on these has always been setup, because once you're set up with the old style, you had to drill 2 holes and you had to get that pointed right in the right position so you could see where your jig is. With this now, I'll walk around, especially in the springtime, hole hopping for crappies, pre-spawn perch and stuff like that, and you just go hold a hole of this thing, just like a transducer. It's just deadly. So check those out. It's great for the kids too. I have 2 little girls, and I bring them out with this thing and
Good bless.
spoil them rotten, Using electronics to set tip-ups at an exact depth. That's just a little tip I wanted to throw in there. Especially for walleye a lot of times. Typically, you want to be on bottom. You'd sound it, reeled up a couple cranks, that's where you want to be. But a lot of times if I'm on a really specific structure, I'm in like Sacandaga Lake, I'm around trees or wood, I'll actually be able to see those trees on there, and I can set my minnow right above it where I want it to be. So, just a handy tool. Rod and reel selection. Obviously application driven. Couple points I want to make with this is just, what you need versus the options available and things you really don't need to go crazy with. My personal choice in panfish setup is something like this. I'm a really big fan of these inline reels the more I use them, because you can free spool your jig all the way down to the bottom like that. Bring it up. The drag on this particular model is not necessarily that great, but you just don't have to change your line that much. The spinning rods, if you're used to it, they're okay, but you find that memory in your line all the time. And with these, it's just this line's been on here all winter, and I've caught a lot of fish on it, and it's still perfectly straight. And as you know, when you're finessing panfish and stuff, sometimes just that little bit of memory is the difference in seeing the bite or not. So I highly recommend playing around with those. They're really fun. Get a lot more life out of your line too. All around rods, I don't think you need a lot of different kinds of stuff. I'm the kind of person, I like to jig for walleyes. I'll do that, for a couple weeks out of the season. Then Lake George freezes, I might want to go play around with the lake trout for a couple weeks. I like to do a lot of different things, but I don't want to have to say, oh, I got to get my lake trout rod, and now I have 5 different panfish rods. You don't really need to do that. This is a nice rod here. 13 Fishing makes it. It's an ultralight rod, but it's got really nice backbone to it. Built-in strike indicator. This is something I'd have no problem fishing with the perch for this. Probably crappies. You probably could even get away with jigging walleyes with this. Stuff like this is really, you can do a lot of different things with them. Usually I'll have a couple of walleye rods that are like a medium action with a really light tip, and a couple really light panfish bluegill rods, and then my lake trout rod, which will just be a little stiffer medium action. Something that can take a little bit more abuse. Rod blank materials, you guys know graphite is obviously some of the lightest stuff out there versus fiberglass, which is stronger. Ugly Sticks, great rod. They make some nice stuff now. They are bulletproof. You can't go wrong with that. It's just really a matter of if you're the kind of person that wants to watch the bite versus feel the bite. A lot of these new lighter rods like this, you can just sit and stare at your electronics and feel the bite to be transmitted through the rod, versus a lot of rods which guys actually like to watch the fish approach the presentation, and then they'll stop at the last minute and watch for the bite. So it's all how you like to fish, but the lighter rods are definitely better for feeling that bite if you're more into that style. Spring bobbers and stuff like that. I don't know. Do you guys use spring bobbers? I think for crappies they're pretty essential, especially when they're really fussy. I think you'll find with this system, if you're in a spot where you don't have to move around a whole lot, once you get to play around with this, I like that, because now I don't have to get into that spring bobber rod. I can use a firmer rod. I can use whatever rod I want to, because I'm watching the fish bite now. It's irrelevant how light they bite. Pretty awesome. And a lot of times I'll use, like I said, the old HT Polar Series rods. You can get them for like $7. They're just a blast to use. You set the hook on them, they bend all the way down to the ground. It's fun to catch fish on them. It's tough to swim the jig with them, but with that camera, it's unbelievable what you can do and what you can use. Reels we kind of touched on. Line selection, panfish. I really like 2-pound tests because of the low memory. With the inline reels, you can get away with a heavier line. Again, because it's not wound so tightly like a spinning reel. Sometimes I'll use 4 or 6-pound tests on those, especially on Lake George, because of you're going to get a lake trout just about probably every day. You're going to have one come in, hit your jig, and if you have 4-pound tests, you're going to be there a while. And if you have 2, you better say a prayer, and then you're going to be there even longer. Rod length inside the fish house. Obviously, you want a shorter rod. Another reason why these little meat sticks, I love these. You know, they're just nice for being close to the hole. Outside of the shelter, you can get away with something longer. I think that probably the biggest rage right now in ice fishing stuff is just, you know, they're making these 36-inch and 48-inch rods. It's just like, I don't know. I mean, personally, I'm not a big fan, but some guys like them. But if you're a guy that likes to move around a lot and you have the flip over shelter, smaller is better. Panfish rods, we kind of went over this already. There's my daughter with a nice big crappie. She, yeah, that was one of the first ones she's ever caught.
Nice.
You take kids fishing, you know, a lot of times you take your girlfriend fishing. I don't care where or what it is. They're catching the biggest fish of the day. Am I wrong? It is a good
They
thing.
want to keep coming
That's
back.
part of
They don't
God's
mind
plan,
so
maybe,
much.
you know?
Is that Lake George crappie?
No, that was Saratoga, actually. And Saratoga, if you guys want to talk panfish, Saratoga's a lake I'll fish for the first 2 weeks of ice for walleyes and crappies.
Where?
And I'll fish the last 2 weeks of ice for walleyes and crappies.
Where?
We'll get into that. Most of, you know, everything with being successful with all these different species is seasonal timing. You know, the crappies, a lot of guys will go to Saratoga and be like, oh, there's no crappies in that lake. Well, probably because you went there in the first week of February when they're all out in the basin suspended, and, you know, unless you're Dave Gens and you're going to go punch 75 million holes out there and drive your truck around all day to find suspended schools of crappies, you're probably not going to catch them. They don't really move into those shallow areas until spring. You know, they're in there in the fall, like a real fall feed still kind of thing. But then they move out and they don't move back in until the springtime. So what I like to do is, you know, last week of February, they'll start to show up there. If we have ice into March, you know, get out in those weed flats, get your camera out and start looking for the greenest, thickest weeds in there and cabbage. You're talking 4 to 8 feet of water. And they'll move in at night, you know, and they'll do that every single day until there's no ice out there anymore. And the biggest crappies will always be the first ones to show up in that migrational pattern. As soon as guys tell me they're catching crappies in the spring, I mean really late winter, that's when I get out there and you're going to catch the biggest crappies of the year like that. I don't know why. I think it's just those mature fish, just they want to be the first ones in there to stake claim at wherever they've been. You know, it's like a real primal instinct it must be for them, but it's just always that way. But yeah, Fitch Beach. You guys ever fish off of Fitch? Browns Beach. Fitch Beach might as well be Browns Beach. They're both the same kind of just big, expansive weed flats. What you'll find out there though is by that time of year, there's going to be areas of just sand where the weeds all died. And then most of the guys that are really on them, they'll be on those patches of cabbage that are still green or growing potentially. That's all there is to it, and you fish them under, you know, they're suspended under the ice. Pretty basic. And they're not going to be there till 3:30 in the afternoon, and they're going to bite until it's dark. I've tried fishing them at night. I don't know what it is, but for some reason, for me, I've never had that good luck at night out on Saratoga. During the spawn, in the winter time, I think they do better because they're just milling around out there in the deeper water. But yeah, that's it. And the walleyes and crappies in Saratoga Lake share the same areas. You know, the walleyes love weeds in Saratoga. The biggest secret I can give you for that is you want to find rock in conjunction with weeds, especially in the summertime when you're fishing open water. Find those areas because you might be on a great big expansive weed flat, and then all of a sudden you find a rock pile, or you find you know, some really silty stuff. There's a lot of that in there, and the walleyes they'll concentrate on those areas, and they'll just sit in there and lay in there, you know, at night, and they'll wait for bluegill fry to come by, and they'll just gobble them up. You know, that's pretty much all there is to it with that. If you want to talk walleyes, we can. I mean, that's not all there is to it, but as far as the weed thing goes, when they're in the weeds, they just like to get in those weed pockets. They're doing the same thing the bass do in the summertime. They just lay there and wait for stuff to go by and eat them, you know. Let's see. Jigging techniques. Like I said, I could probably just sit and talk about all the different things I like to use all day long. Micro jigs, definitely for panfish. Tungsten with plastics. Like all the stuff that Scott makes. That stuff's just... I don't really use the bell sinker with the 2 flies anymore. I'm not going to say it's not as good, but, where a lot of like the real good perch guys fish on Lake George and the areas that get heavily fished, you're really trying to finesse those bigger fish. And first light, Scott, you might hit a couple on the first couple drops, but to get into those pickier fish areas with that traditional setup, they kind of catch on after a couple fish. You really got to work them, and I think that's where the individual plastics comes in. You can really finesse each fish individually. For walleyes, there's a million different things you could catch a walleye on. Jig and Rapalas, you just can't beat them. They just love them. Nothing will bring in a walleye like a jig and Rapala. They're vibration feeders. You're always making a lot of bottom contact. I'll tell you, as much as I'm talking about electronics, when I use a jig and wrap for walleyes, I turn the thing off. Because generally, if you're working it at the right cadence, which is just a slow lift and fall, slow lift and fall, slow lift and fall, and that it's just spinning around in about a 2 foot radius. A lot of pausing. Walleyes generally will not hit anything until it stops. They love that. You jig it, let it sit still, they'll hit it. Sometimes you'll be jigging it. When it stops, they'll inhale it, and then on the jig, you'll just have the fish on. I don't like electronics when I'm using jigging wraps, because especially people that don't do it a lot, you're jigging and you're watching your jig on there, and then the walleye shows up. Oh my God! And then if the fish doesn't bite it, then now he's just staring at it. You've stopped doing what's made the fish come in. Just keep doing it. It's like a cat and mouse. So a lot of times I'll just tell people, you're just working that at the right cadence, and don't worry about it. The fish will hook itself. They're going to come in, they're going to eat it when he's ready to eat it, and then when you jig, whoa, you got a fish on. That's all you do with them. And then every like maybe 5 or 6 jigging motions, hit the ground with it. Especially if there's rocks or silt down there, they'll feel that, and they'll come in, What else? Spoons. Spoons are good too. Spoons with tipped with a minnow head. Same thing, just lift and fall. A lot of pausing. The pause is more critical than anything, and you don't want to overwork them. Some guys, the jig and wrap, if you're really ripping it like this, that thing is just like, whoa, that fish is probably going down there like, holy, I've never seen a minnow do that before. It's just a very light, because the deeper the water, the more that thing has room to go in a circle. So in 8 to 10 feet of water, you just jig it very slowly like this, and that's all you need to do. Don't overwork it. What's up, Jamie?
What's up, Joey?
We got a deadly lake trout fisherman in the room right now.
Bad finger.
Oh, really? Uh-oh. Hopefully it heals up before the ice forms. I'm going to tell a story about Jamie later, but first guy to ever take me catfishing. Caught an 18-pounder that night. That was a fun night. So it could have been 4. We didn't have a scale, but it had to be 18 pounds. It wasn't over 20, so it was probably 15, but we wanted to be somewhere up there. So what else we got here? Pre-spawn pan fishing, mobility and drilling a lot of holes. So let's talk about that in relation to the spring panfish run. You get on those weed flats I was discussing in Saratoga, you want to Swiss cheese them. You want to get all your holes cut, so when those fish come in, you're done. Because a lot of times you get in there, your first couple crappies come in, you catch one. There's probably there's probably a school with them. As soon as you catch that fish, they go all over the place. You might have to relocate, get back on one. You know, you got to be able to move around a lot. So get all your holes cut. Not so critical on some place like Lake George where the fish are always deeper because they're in 30, 35 feet of water. But definitely shallow if you want to get into the bluegills and the crappies in the springtime. Swiss cheese the place. I can see somebody left these. Anybody buy one of these yet? The Neros? I just switched over to this and they're really nice. It's that Nose Master two-handed action. It makes drilling so much nicer. I mean, I don't even think I'm gonna get any powered auger out until the ice is 8 or 10 inches thick. You know, they're awesome. Check them out. Pretty inexpensive too. We covered a lot of this stuff already. Walleye. You guys want to talk walleye?
Yeah.
All right. My pattern around here is I'll fish Saratoga first ice, and then I fish the Sacandaga the rest of the season. I like fishing the Sacandaga a lot. There's not necessarily big fish in there, but you can usually find them and have pretty good success and go home with a nice dinner. Saratoga, the fish are bigger. It's just walleye are in a late fall feeder. You know, once you get into January, early February, the ice gets thick and the snow gets thick. They tend to be a little more finicky. You know, that really aggressive feed is gone. The guys that are really good on Saratoga, they follow the fish around the lake and they know where to find them and what times they need to catch them. And a lot of that bite turns into a night bite, which is fun if you like to be out all night. You know, I like to go on Sacandagas. That's pretty much all season is good. All winter, you know, you can have pretty good success out there. First and last light. If you're gonna catch walleye on Sacandaga in the morning, you better have your stuff set up in the dark because it's gonna be first light. It's not the kind of place you can go out at first light, get drilling, and the sun's kind of coming up, and you get all your tip ups out, and you catch one, and then by that time it's pretty much over. Many days we'll have 14 tip ups out there between the two of us, and 3 or 4 are up, and it's still dark. You know, they're just, I don't know what it is out there, but you know, there's a reason they call it the Dead Sea, and it's not because there's no fish in there. It's because for the most part, you're not going to catch much during the day except pike. It's just the walleyes. I don't know. It's the weirdest thing I've tried. I mean, when I first started fishing it, I told myself I was going to go out there and drill a bunch of holes and try to catch fish jigging and, you know, really pound the mud and just try to pick away at them, and just, it's tough. So that's the tip I can give you out there. We'll talk about location. There's a lot of walleye in Sacandaga. You really got to have a good contour map, and you got to find all the little structures and humps and stuff out there, which I'll show you how to do. Once you get doing that, you develop a system where you're going to get up early in the morning. You find a point. If you can't get out there on the open water and already figure out spots that you've had success on, you know, map it out as if you were deer hunting. Say we're gonna fish this point today. We're gonna get out there in the dark. We're gonna put all our stuff out and see what happens. And you'll be surprised. You'll just about always catch a couple walleyes, and you might have a field day. You know, when you really find the good spots. All right. We already went over the rods, jig and rapalas that are good in there. Early in the season, rattle baits, especially on Saratoga Lake. First ice, you're basically fishing the late fall pattern, just vertically and not horizontally. What I mean by that is, you know, we might be using suspended husky jerks, stuff that we're fishing real slow with a lot of pauses. You're doing the same thing on the ice, but you're doing it vertically. Rattle baits that you can rip slowly, that sink very slowly. You know, things that you can have the fish come in on the sonar and you can just work them real slow with some rattling. Dynamite. Later on in the season, not so much, but those are things you want to use early when the fish are aggressive. You call them right in, make a lot of noise, you know, and you're going to have success. Tip-ups when jigging. When I set up for walleye, I'm doing pretty much the opposite I'm doing with panfish. I already know where I want to be. I'm not cutting a lot of holes. I'm cutting the holes I need to cut. I put my tip-ups out. I will always set a tip-up next to where I'm jigging, because many times you'll call 2 or 3 fish in, they won't commit. You have a tip-up 5 feet away. They don't like the aggressive bait I'm using, but I called the fish in with it. He swims over, he sees the minnow, bang, you just caught him on a tip-up. Nice. So that's real important. Use your tip-ups to your advantage. Call those fish in. If they're not going to commit on your bait, they're going to like the live bait, usually. How vibration is transmitted to rod action. That's pretty important with stuff like rattle baits and blade baits. You want a softer action, so the parabolics of that rod are working a lot of vibration into it, versus a stiff rod where it might just be going brr, brr. That slow, soft rod really puts a lot of action into it. So that's really the reason why you want a few different rods for one species, is for different baits. Use of electronics versus opting out for the jig and wraps, that was something we talked about earlier. But yeah, with jig and Rapalas, I just pound the bottom and I just jig. The fish will usually just hit them.
What size?
Jig and wraps, 5s and 7s.
5s and 7s.
5s and 7s. I would say 7 is probably the holy grail unilaterally for walleye anywhere, but the 5s are good too.
Thank you.
Yep. Black and gold, black and silver. The rainbow trout one is very good. Looks like a baby bluegill with the bars on it and the little dots and stuff. Yeah, those probably are my favorites. We could talk about color and glow in the dark and stuff like that. I don't really use a lot of glow. I like white. I'm not going to say it doesn't work. Obviously, it does. Some people will probably tell you it's the best thing since sliced bread. I personally don't. I mean, I've caught them in the dark on black and silver, Nothing they eat in the lake is glowing ever, So, I mean, I think a really aggressive fish that finds that bait will eat it, and somebody might think, wow, the glow's awesome. For panfish, a little different story, but, I mean, that's just my personal experience with walleye. My 2 cents on that. Using contour maps to scout and set up. We'll get to that. Lake trout rods, ladies and gentlemen. Jamie, you want to? Yeah, lake trout is a whole different thing. You guys jig lakers? Pretty much. I mean, anybody that jigs lake trout is gonna love it. It's fun. The fish like to chase. As much as I fish for lake trout in the summer, I can tell you on the winter time, I do it a couple times a year. I'm definitely, it's not something I consider myself an expert on. I know guys that really can finesse lake trout that don't want to chase, and if it's a day where they don't want to do that, it's okay, But lake trout, definitely you can just hammer away on them with a big medium action, something with a lot of bend in it. It's a fish you're going to feel strike. It's a fish that likes to chase. You put anything white or shiny down and you're probably going to have some success with it. I think it's interesting, the guys that really are using the goby and a lot of the smaller stuff and really finessing the fish now. There's a lot of stuff out there now for catching lake trout, the Kitex and the paddle tail baits that guys are using. Pretty neat. You guys want to talk about lake trout a little bit? So for me on Lake George, obviously I've fished it my whole life. Lake trout are the kind of fish, they're never in one spot exclusively. You have shallow fish, you have deep fish, you have Cisco fish, you have smelt fish, you have suspended fish, you have perch fish. I really believe there's lake trout that spend their whole lives on the edges of weeds. We'll catch lake trout in the dead of summer in the same areas there's bass. And the same thing in the wintertime. Anybody that's fished for perch on Lake George long enough knows that if you fish for perch, you're going to catch lake trout eventually. They love being in the weeds. They love eating perch. I think it's a lot easier for them to catch than smelt and Cisco, and it's cold, so they can be up there. There's a buffet of food up there in those weeds in the wintertime. The smelt are in the weeds a lot in the wintertime. You know, you'll catch Cisco. Anybody ever catch Cisco in the weeds? Strays? You will. Jigging for perch once in a while. But, so it's really the population of fish you want to target. I like to go and fish the grass flats. I can catch perch there, I can catch lake trout, and I can catch northern pike. You know, and that's something that Richie likes to do a lot. If you want to just strictly focus on lake trout, probably the best areas in the lake are the flats, you know, where that holds smelt. Northwest Bay is one of my favorites. Anywhere in the basin of the lake that holds a lot of bait, you're going to run into lakers. And then you're going to have always your deep water Cisco populations of them. If you want to jig that deep. That big bowl of Lake George you could cut holes out there and find bait on bottom in 160 feet of water year round, and there's lake trout there. You know, it's really just all how you like to fish. For the line selection, I don't know. What do you think? 10-pound test, Jamie?
I use 8.
8?
Yeah, when I'm jigging in the
I like 8. I'd rather use something later. That doesn't coil up as much on you. And again, location. I mean, a lot of times in the winter, you could catch a lake trout anywhere in that lake on any given day. You know, it's just finding the pods of fish. I know I've gone out in Northwest Bay and slaughtered them, and the next day they're not there. You know, they're like any other fish. They kind of hang out in pods together and follow the bait around. Sometimes they come in 2 or 3 at a time, and then sometimes you gotta move around and find them again.
How deep you fishing in?
The entire bay is 70 to 80 feet deep. So, you know, once you're out in the middle there, you can pretty much cut a hole anywhere, and you're be hard to find anything deeper than 80 feet. But I like that depth personally because, you know, it's better for the fish, bringing them up from that really deep water. They always get a lot of gas in them.
I think the last couple of years, Joey, we've caught bigger fish in the shallower waters.
Yeah.
Like 40.
Yeah.
Anywhere from 40
I've
feet.
definitely seen a push on that lake.
We've caught a lot of big ones in now, 42 feet.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a shallower.
For the bait fishing, but they're constantly up beyond move and foul.
Yep. And just catch and release on the bigger fish, guys. You know, that's just my personal thing. I don't like to tell guys they can't keep fish, but, you know, keep those smaller ones.
They're eating anyway.
Let those 10-pounders go,
Yeah.
and that's the way to go for sure. Yeah, keep those 23, 24 inchers. They're much better eating.
Using braid line or fluorocarbon?
I like braid if you're inside and it doesn't freeze. For the most part, though, you're probably gonna be
Real
stuck
deep
with
water,
some kind of.
braid with maybe a fluorocarbon, 10 foot,
Yep.
12 foot.
I like braid for everything. It's just you're gonna deal with the freezing a lot of days, which gets aggravating. But if it's warm enough, it's not a problem. Or if you're inside of it, if you're gonna just camp out for the day, braid's the way to go, especially in deeper water, because you feel everything so much better. Yeah.
What about the landlocked fishery in Lake George? Is it
You know, we do okay on them in the summer, but we work for them. The salmon's nothing like it used to be 20 years ago. It's just not. I can tell by how they mark when I find them. You know, there's small pods of salmon that are surviving from the stocking, and that's our opinion anyway. And it's getting better. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's getting much better than it was 5 years ago. But the thing with the salmon is they just move in pods. They're like bluefin tuna. You know, I would compare fishing for them is like fishing for bluefin tuna in the ocean. You got 80% dead water, and you're just constantly on the hunt for that pod of fish that's chasing bait around. So you really just got to get lucky. If I was to really target salmon all year, I would spread my stuff out as far as I possibly could on the ice to intercept those fish wherever they are. You know, the clarity in Lake George, guys set their tip-ups up, 50 yards apart, and if a fish is even 100 yards from that bait in that area, it's going to find it eventually. Spread your stuff out, especially for salmon, until you really hone in on an area they're using, because you just have a better chance at those fish moving around and finding that one tip-up versus having 10 in one spot or however many you have set up in one spot, and they might not be around that whole day. So I would say spread them out as far as you legally can, 5 to 20 feet down. You know, smelt. They're always on those smelt schools. Guys tell me right under the ice too. I like them a little bit deeper than that, but that's pretty much all you can do. Being on the edges of things, rock structure, stuff like that, things that are going to funnel the fish up against your presentation are good places to set up. But yeah, it's just not like the old days. I mean, the guys that used to go out on first ice and melee the salmon years ago, you know, but I don't know.
Joe, now the inline reel, would you use that for the trout?
If you can find one with a good drag, this, again, I'm not trying to knock the company or anything. It just, this drag is not really meant to be, you can see as I'm using it here, I'm loosening it. It's basically off or it's on. All right. I had a 26-inch world-class trophy lake trout on that I thought was the biggest fish in the freaking lake, and it was because of this. I was just free spooling it on this thing like a center pin reel, and I fought that thing for way longer than I should have had to. But for the panfish, it's unreal. Yeah, big fan.
The speed on the inlines, the drop rate.
Yeah.
On the inlines is tough if you're fishing deep water.
True.
I had a
True.
couple. You need one that free spools, and then you got to be on top.
Yeah.
It's spinning gear or a bait caster.
Yeah. Or you got to be using something heavy enough that to really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or you got to kind of hand feed. But for me, I love the fact that there's zero memory on it, you know. Auger selections. Have you guys played around with the drills or the battery powered stuff?
We just bought one with a clam hookup and
Yep.
my old laser.
Yep. Pretty amazing.
I mean, it was inhibiting to go out and drill.
Do you like it or no? Yeah. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the battery stuff. Again, not, you know, I think the gas auger will always have a place. It's just kind of the nostalgia of it.
There's another key
But-
on the electric ones, Joe, is the noise from the power ones will actually move the bait, especially if you're in shallower water. You know?
Yep.
And it takes a while for them to come back around. So when you first get there, you got one of the power ones, cut a shitload of holes, bunch of holes, and let it settle down. You know?
Yep.
The electric ones, that doesn't seem to bother.
Yeah.
You know?
Hole size, you know, if I could have one all-around auger, it would probably be an 8-inch. Reason you could fish for panfish. I mean, with the drills, we're getting. I haven't even cut enough holes to kill the battery on them with an 8-inch auger. So why not go with it?
Right.
You know, and then you could pull a 40, 50-inch pike through that. So I would say that's probably the way to go for all-around panfish, walleye. You know, you start to get into some really big crappies. They're kind of tough to get out of a 6-inch hole sometimes.
Joe, you're saying you never killed the battery. Is that the ion you're talking about?
Yes.
Oh, I thought you meant the hand drill. I'm like,
Both. To be honest with you, both. The ion, when they're warm, I've never had an issue with it. I've cut as many holes as I wanted to. When they get cold, that's the only issue I've found with them.
3 amp battery for your ion?
5. For the drill, the 5.
I gotta get
5.
five.
What is it, Milwaukee?
It's the Daywall 996. My buddy actually had that last year. That thing is just a monster.
You never killed the battery out there?
Nope.
I run into wall too. I had 2 days.
The ion too. The only problem, again, not to knock the company, is just they're just tough to keep warm. You know, I have to like incubate it. The thing, it's heavy.
If you're a walker, they're heavy.
You want to put inside your
And they're heavy. The motor on them is heavy. But like I said, they'll always have their place. You know, the idea of having the stability while you're drilling with 2 hands, there's something to be said about that. But all in all, I'll tell you guys right now, that thing is, I've just never seen anything like it.
I bought a
What is
clam
that unit?
hookup for when you put your drill in with the
Yeah,
hand.
they're good. Yep.
What is that unit you were talking about on the DeWalt there?
That is the, it's like a 996, I want to say.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
996 battery.
20
Brushless,
Yeah.
20 volt.
Yeah. 20 volt.
Yep.
18.
20
That's
volt.
a 20 volt?
Yep. And then, you know, they're just a nice machine. All right, so here's our contour maps, and this is kind of like, you know, the meat and potatoes of everything to me. I really enjoy reading maps. I enjoy finding fish and trying to understand why they're in a certain spot, and then when you look at the map, oftentimes it's like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. So obviously this is nowhere near here. This is Mille Lacs Lake. Good walleye lake. Very, very similar to Sacandaga in a lot of ways, which is why I pulled that up. It's just one of the few maps I could find on when I searched for a contour map picture. But very similar, shallow, a lot of humps. You know, I call Sacandaga the walleye playground because there's just a lot of good spots. I mean, if you look at the map of it, there's a lot of different little rock piles and old creek channels, and you know, you could probably set up on every single spot in that lake, and you'd never be able to do it in a lifetime, you know. So, talking walleyes, transitions. That's really what you're looking for. You're looking for big, obvious features in the middle of the lake. Sacandaga, we're talking now. But transitions. In that particular body of water, you'll find a lot of 20 to 30 foot flats out in the middle of the reservoir. And then there'll be humps that come up to 6 or 8, big rock bars. And what you're going to do is basically, you know, say I wanted to fish this big bar here. You know, you want to string your stuff right along about here. Okay? Because what the fish do is, you know, they're working and following those transitions like highways. They're not necessarily sliding up and down. I'll have stuff up on the shallow structure. You might catch a fish or two up there, but you're going to find a major flurry of activity, usually around these transitions, and then they're done around 8 to 8:30 in the morning. They don't go anywhere. You know, they're there all the time. It's just they're turning on and then they're done. You know, we've put the underwater camera down there and seen fish just laying there inactively, and then they're not biting. They're just laying there. Then the sun starts to go down, your first flag goes off, and then they're feeding again. So that's kind of the routine with Sacandaga. Saratoga Lake, the main lake's structure kind of stuff is good. Not really so much early in the season as much as later in the season. You know, if I was to compare this to Saratoga Lake, say this would be Browns Beach down here. This is the reason I picked this picture. Basically, this is the whole south basin of Saratoga Lake. These mud flats out here, very, very underfished. You can put a spread of tip-ups out there and usually catch some nice perch. Just no rhyme or reason, 20 to 25 feet out in that basin. Again, spread them way out. Really nice perch mixed in with walleye first ice. The walleye in Saratoga, however, you know, they're movers. They're usually laying out in the mud somewhere off the edge of the weed line, and they're moving into those flats at night, and they'll cruise around in there. Sometimes they'll just lay in there, like I said earlier. So generally, if I'm fishing that, what I'll do is I string my stuff right out along the weed line. I'll use my fish finder or my AquaView. I'm looking for weeds. I'll cut a hole out into the deeper water, weeds, cut a hole out into the deeper water, mud. Okay, there's your weed line. You know, and then you're finding that sweet spot in between, and I'll usually string my stuff up right along that, and I'm trying to intercept fish going from the mud into the flats. If I'm fishing all night, generally I'll have all my holes cut in the shallower stuff, spread out along the weeds, and then once that transition, the evening to night transition bite is over, I'll move all my stuff up into those flats, and then they'll camp out there for the night. Then you'll pick fish off, you know, here and there. The night bite is usually rarely a fast and furious thing. You know, they're just they're just kind of, they'll pick away at your stuff here and there. Not that you can't have a fantastic night, we have, but generally speaking, that transition's usually the best bite.
More with the tip ups or with the jigging?
Both.
Oh,
Both.
you
Yep.
always do both.
I haven't jigged a tunnel in the dark, mostly tip ups, but I'm sure you could. It's just sitting there, just mindlessly jigging.
Right.
You know, your best action for jigging is going to be at that cusp of darkness, because you'll see the fish. You'll really notice when they start moving. You know, you'll have a lot of fish show up all of a sudden. All right, that's the deal with that. The only safe ice, it's an ice cube tray, right there. Ice safety, I mean, you guys know that, but I talk about first ice a lot, and you know, the floating fishing gear, we never had that technology back in, obviously, you know, everybody wore Carhartts, and you know, maybe your old snowmobile suit, you busted that baby out, you know what I mean? Or your hunting clothes. I mean, we never even had ice fishing clothing,
Wow. No such
you know. But now with all the floating stuff, well worth the purchase. I went in on Sacandaga a few years ago, and between that stuff and the ice picks definitely saved my life.
Okay.
You know?
You went in?
Oh yeah. In the dark.
Yeah.
It's not an alternative solution for floating.
Yeah.
It only gives you about probably 15 minutes to get out of the ice or to get help.
Rope is a good idea.
That's scary.
You know, if you're don't go alone first ice, bring a rope, something long enough where you can throw it to somebody if you have to. And just reading the ice, you know, for me, first ice, in my opinion, is some of the safest ice because it's clear. You know, I'd rather be on that than 6 or 8 inches of snow-covered ice after a warming trend. Yes.
I wear a life jacket. I've been up 8 days already this season.
Yep.
I wear a life jacket every time I go out.
Absolutely.
I come to say that today because I went through twice last weekend. Another guy that fishes out here went through last weekend. There is no safe ice.
Yep.
So all these people on Facebook that keep running their lips and saying there's a little bit of ice or not enough ice, don't listen to them. Find out for yourselves.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to say to you.
And learn to read the ice. You know, if you're on 3 to 5 inches of black ice, it's better be a really cold day. You know, you should be able to look right through that ice everywhere, and everywhere you cut is universally the same thickness. A lot of guys fall through when they say, well, I had 4 inches here, but then I went over here and I had 1.5. That's a red flag. You know, you should be able to go anywhere you want in that area and cut the same thickness through thick black, you know, ice. The coloration will tell you a lot. If we've had snow cover and it's been warm and it melts and refreezes, that also, if you cut through that and you got 5 to 6 inches, you know, that's also ice I like, because if the snow's been on that long enough, you know, probably what's underneath it was good that made through the duration of the period of rain or whatever just happened. So, you know, learn to read the ice. The biggest thing is just have the safety stuff with you, and you know, don't go alone.
Well, you spud. You can tell by the sound.
Spud bar. Yep. Current and spring. So that's something I would like to talk about, especially in Saratoga Lake. There's a lot of springs and there's a lot of current. That north section that's fed by the Cateros, there's a great big bar that goes out into the middle of the lake. Call it Bluegill Hill. Drops off into 80 feet of water. There's some good spots along that. But that current, it's just like a big wash bowl out there. And if you ever drive by Saratoga while the ice is forming, you can see it. You can see a lot of times there'll be open water straight out through there, even though there's a couple inches of ice on top of that structure. So, and it's like that a lot on that lake. Just be real careful out there. Yeah.
And Fish Creek's another dangerous spot in Saratoga. My
Yeah.
buddy went through there.
Did he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where I learned that you have to be able to get yourself out. You know, getting that rope to them is difficult.
Critical.
Yeah.
And not fun.
Dragging somebody out through that hole is a heavy process.
It's not fun. Sacandaga also, there's, you know, when they mess around with that lake level, there's really, really shallow sandbars out there all over the place, and there might be ice on it one day. The sun beats down on that sand and warms it up, it'll open right up. So you never really know, is the bottom line. You just always got to be real careful. That's always my safety spiel because I fish, or I love first ice, but you know, you just got to be careful. There's not a fish out there worth it. Thank you. Have a great season. Have a great holiday. Do you guys have any questions? Anything you want to talk about, or?
What are you using for lures when you're jigging for the Lakers? Big spoons? Or?
White tubes, spoons, any kind of tube.
I don't think it matters what you use, Joe.
Anything shiny. Anything shiny and that looks like a minnow, they're gonna probably whack, you know. Swedish pimples.
Guys saying, you know, buy suckers, big suckers, $1 a piece.
For tip-ups?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
They swim right down to the depth. They don't figure out getting down.
They definitely love suckers, yeah.
I'm new
Yep.
to the area, so this is
Oh, okay.
all new to me.
Yeah, they're really not too picky, you know,
Once you find them.
once you find them.
How is the smelt population in Lake George? Is that growing?
I think it's better than I've seen it, and you know, there used to be gobs and gobs of smelt. You know, and another thing, a lot of guys don't remember these days, but when I was a kid, and there were a lot of charter boats on Lake George back in those days, probably twice as many as now, and they kept a lot of lake trout. And probably mid-'80s, late 80s, there were no lake trout in the South Basin of Lake George, and guys will laugh at me for saying that because they weren't around back then or didn't know that, but the charter boats, they all used to come up to Hague and fish. They weren't catching any lake trout because they were whacking them all over the head. So the smelt population, for some reason, we lost smelt for a while there, and then they closed it to fishing and dipping, and now they're back. I'm seeing a lot of smelt again, so I think it's pretty good. And we're seeing a lot more lake trout than ever before now too, so that's good. But back in those days, I mean, we saw 25, 28, 30 pounders come out every year, but they're just not there.
Yeah.
You know, you take a fish like that, that's basically prehistoric, probably 30, 40 years old.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once you remove that fish and those genetics from the system, you know, you're stunning the lake. That's what's happened in that lake, you know. If you take 10 lake trout and, you know, most of them are 20 to 26 inches, and then you catch a 29 and you kill it, but you put the other ones back, you do that 10 times, how big are the fish,
Those are
you
the
know?
breeders.
So,
I was just going to say, there's a lake trout seminar at 2 p.m. on jigging lake trout only.
nice.
2 p.m.
Good too.
If you're interested.
If you guys are interested, yeah. But I think overall the lake's doing pretty well, you know.
Good.
Tremendous bait population. So
But the salmon will never be natural in this lake. They're always just stocked, or
I don't think so, but don't quote me on that. They've always been stocked. There's so much gray area with the landlocked salmon in general and Atlantic salmon as a species. I mean, look at Lake Ontario. That place is it's a fish pond. You know, every single species in that lake is thriving except the Atlantic salmon. Why is that? I don't know. You know, they've struggled everywhere throughout the history of their species. I mean, aside from farm raising them, they're the most highly prized salmon out there, you know, and I think I don't know. They're just a very mysterious kind of a strain of fish. They do really well some years they don't. They do really well in some lakes and others they don't, you know, so. But I do believe they're doing better. You know, we're seeing a lot more of them now, a lot more numbers. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this year on the ice if guys start picking away at them, you know. They put enough of them in, I can tell you that. I mean, I think the last time they stocked, they put like 30,000 salmon in each end of the lake. So there's a lot of debate on the lake trout predation on them. I really didn't believe that until this year when I came across a pot of juveniles. On every pass I was catching 2 or 3 of them. I was in a little 60-foot hole up on the midsection of the lake, and every time I caught those salmon, I'd be looking down at my electronics and there'd be 3 or 4 Lakers hovering on bottom in 60 feet of water. So I was kind of like, ugh, you know, and those young, when they put those in the lake, they'll still just stay right in that area for quite a while, you know. So it was almost like those lake trout were just there loafing. You know, they'd get hungry and probably eat a couple, but I don't know. That's what makes sense to me, I guess. And I didn't want to believe it, but could be true. Well, thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for listening to me. I hope you got a little something out of it. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the day.